Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give it a minute for everyone to stream in here. Okay, let's begin. Hello, my name is Kara Vincent, and I am the knowledge translator here at CIPSERT. Welcome everybody to today's talk, the Sky Resilience Program, Meditation Training for First Responders and Other PSP. Before we get started, there are just a few very quick housekeeping items that I'd like to go through. All attendees are in listen-only mode just to limit background noise, and attendee cameras are also off. Today's session is being recorded, and you will be sent a copy tomorrow via email if you'd like to watch it again. One thing to keep in mind is that the GoToWebinar launch window can sometimes be blocked by certain organizations. So if you are having trouble seeing or hearing, you may have to join us by phone as opposed to computer audio. Questions. We have set aside time for audience questions at the end of the session. However, you can send us your questions throughout the session at any time by using the question box feature. If you want to ask your question anonymously, please mention that you prefer to be anonymous in your question. Okay, before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which this webinar is being hosted. The University of Regina is situated on Treaty 4 lands with a presence in Treaty 6. These are the territories of the Nihayawak, Anasinnapek, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. This land acknowledgement is part of an ongoing conversation as we work toward reconciliation. And now I'm so pleased to welcome our speakers today. We have with us Dr. Abhimanyu Sood, who is the Chief Scientific Officer of the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Veterans and President of the International Association for Human Values. Spencer DeLille is the Vice President of the International Association for Human Values. Marcel K. Ross is the Executive Director of the Sky Resilience Program. And Steve Stokan is a retired constable with the London Police Service and peer support leader of the Sky Resilience Program. And now I will happily turn it over to our first wonderful presenter, Spencer DeLille.
Wonderful, thank you, Kara, and thank you to Kara and Kyle and really the whole CIPSERT team for inviting us today. We also feel really grateful that you've taken time out of your day today to your busy schedule to learn more about how the Sky Resilience Program has really been transforming the lives of first responders here in Canada, but internationally as well. We also feel very fortunate that Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Marcus Besseman has joined us today to share his experience a little bit later as well. So with that in mind, let's kick things off. Just make sure my screen, everyone can see my screen here. Super. So Kara has introduced all of us here. A little bit of an outline for today's presentation. We'll speak about our organization, the International Association for Human Values. We'll speak about the toll of operational stress, and who better to talk about that than a 30-year veteran, first responder, retired Constable Steve Stokan. And then we'll be speaking a little more in depth about the Sky Resilience Workshop. So what it entails, what do we actually teach, what are the benefits of the program, the investment, and what kind of support do first responders receive. Then we're going to share a case study, which is the Sky Resilience program that's being done with the Brazilian military police right now. Marcel Queiroz hopefully will be here to present. He's actually been pulled into a program with the Brazilian military, so I may be presenting his data. And then after that, Dr. Sud will share with us some international and Canadian Sky research, including his own research study. And then we're going to have a sharing of experience from Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Marcus Besseman. Then we'll have some time for some Q&A, and we'll leave a slide up of how you can connect with us. And before you know it, it'll be on the hour, the next hour, wherever you are, 1 p.m. for us here in Eastern Standard Time, and we'll close things up. So we are the International Association for Human Values. We are a registered Canadian charity with the CRA. We are an educational and humanitarian not-for-profit with special consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, and we have a presence in 152 countries globally. We're really committed to a stress-free, violence-free society. So we set big goals for ourselves, and that's why we're so pleased to be connecting with you in the first responder communities today, so we can see how we can join hands to make this vision a reality. As I said, we're present in about 150 countries. Our programs and workshops, including our events, have touched the lives of over 450 million people. We have over 57 programs, including Sky Resilience. We have a program for active military and veterans called the Project Welcome Home Troops, as well as programs for physician and healthcare worker wellness, prison programs, and corporate programs as well. And we have a number of humanitarian efforts that work with social programs, conflict resolution, and peace building. You may recognize some of our partners here throughout North America. We work with a number of different first responder agencies throughout Canada and the US, and in fact, internationally. This is more of a North American focused list. And we work with some leading university institutions here in Canada, the US, and around the world. And we also work with the Canadian Armed Forces and the United States Armed Forces as well. So with that in mind, to give us some insights into the toll of operational stress on first responders, I'm going to pass it to almost 30-year veteran, recently retired Constable Steve Stokan. Steve?
Greetings. My name is Steve Stokan. I'm a retired member of the London Police Service living with PTSD. I started in 1993, and in 1997, I was involved in a series of back-to-back traumatic events that caused PTSD. I had sleep disturbance, nightmares, and hypervigilance. I was young and resilient back then, and I recovered on my own after a few years. It reoccurred in 2006 after a cluster of incidents that had occurred. This time, though, I was numb. I stopped coaching all my kids' sports teams. I isolated away from everybody in my life. My life became gray soup. I just shut off all my emotions, even the good ones. This was very interesting to me because many of my symptoms made me a better cop. Hypervigilance and being numb keeps you switched on and ready for anything. Back then, I was receiving stellar feedback for my work performance. In 2015, I was a detective in human trafficking investigation, and I started suffering from burnout and compassion fatigue. I just could not shut my mind off, and sleep would not come to me. I became emotional. I started crying when I was alone and in my head, and I requested a change of duties and asked to go back to the street. So in January of 2016, I was back on the road. In October of 2016, I finally had to go off work as my symptoms just started to overwhelm me. Over the next 2 years, I really suffered. I missed a lot of work. I wanted to go back. I could never really find lasting skills that could mitigate my racing mind. I just couldn't sleep, and I had a hard time controlling my turbulent emotions and angry outbursts. My body was in an anxious state. Mental health providers spoke about the importance of meditation, yoga, and grounding techniques, but few taught it. I tried teaching myself by using apps like Calm and Headspace. I purchased a Muse, which is a brain sensing headband. Then I had formal training, the mindfulness-based stress reduction course by John Kabat-Zinn. This is the North American gold standard in meditation. I also learned I Rest meditation by Richard Miller, which is a yoga nidra body scan meditation prevalent in the United States. These were very effective if you constantly practice and are motivated to meditate, not as beneficial when you're activated during triggering times where I had strong emotional reactions. In 2018, my psychiatrist suggested Sky. She explained it was a well-researched, evidence-based intervention that could benefit me mentally and physiologically. I participated and I had immediate results. Calm just came over me. It was tangible, I could actually feel it. Basically, the practice is mostly seated, needing no background training at all. You went through a series of diaphragmatic breath work, and very early on, you could feel your mood lightening and a calm peace come over you. It was meditation on steroids. The benefits lasted throughout the day, and when I practiced regularly, it kept me within my window of tolerance during difficult and activating times. But it was also good when I was not motivated. I didn't have to be in the right headspace to do like you do with meditation. You do the practice and you get results. This is where I think Sky is superior for first responders. We are terrible at self-care until it's needed. Traditional meditation success depends on the individual. Sky practice thrives in groups. Sky helped me with my racing mind. With regular sleep started coming back to me. It curbed my angry outbursts with my family and friends. When I became activated, I had a useful tool to get it under control. Sky replaced bad coping with good coping. As a first responder, we are impacted daily by fight, flight, and freeze moments, and our sympathetic system gets activated in stressful times. We finish one call and we go right on to the next one. Our parasympathetic system never gets the chance to rebalance itself, and with time, our amygdala or our brain hijacks us and starts to react to everything as a threat and that we never feel safe. Sky counters this phenomenon by allowing our body to get back into homeostasis or a balanced state. So, what if I had Sky in my toolbox? Well, back in 1997, right after the incidences that I was involved in, I was openly upset in front of my coworkers, having emotional outbursts, and I was crying. I was having a normal post-traumatic stress symptoms. I could have implemented Sky, or if I didn't catch it because I was too caught up in the moment, an NCO, a peer supporter, or a friend, seeing I was exhibiting signs of operational stress, could have helped me. I believe I would have stabilized from the Sky practice, and maybe my injury would not have progressed to PTSD. Same for my burnout, and same for my bout in 2006. If I used Sky in 2015 when I started to struggle, or prior to its onset, I could have done the practice alone or with my team as a healthy, proactive step, acknowledging we are doing a difficult job under difficult circumstances, and together we can get through this. This would have created an open dialogue into stress, normalized its impact on us, and allowed people to openly learn and support each other in difficult times. In the past, we didn't talk about it. We suppressed our emotions and maybe distracted ourselves in unhealthy ways. This was the breeding ground for stigma. I believe that if Sky was in my toolbox at the beginning of my career, operational stress would have had a different impact on me, and it also may not have led to operational stress injury, or at least it would have mitigated its impact on me. So now, I'd like to talk about how Sky could be implemented within a first responder agency like the police, fire, EMS, or corrections. First off, Sky could be instructed at the recruit level. We could also, Sky should be instructed or recertified in every identified high-risk unit. So in policing, our tactical unit, forensic identification, or major crime or specialty units. Sky should be instructed or recertified for accommodated members to shore up their own resilience. A Sky practice could be offered by supervisors or peer supporters when a member is exhibiting signs of operational stress like emotional outbursts or poor work practices. Sky should be offered as the first step in disciplinary issues for complaints like angry outbursts, excessive or unreasonable behavior versus an adversarial means of discipline. Management could use Sky to support and embrace their members in a caring and compassionate way by showing they support the member and they just want the disciplinary issue to cease. This is usually hand in part of the complaint process, and you can notify the civilians that are complaining of the steps taken to mitigate and stop this behavior. So let's talk about the practical applications of Sky in an organization. Prior to or at the conclusion of a shift, Sky could be practiced in an identified area or a parade room every 24 hours on the hour, and a Sky room could be available for its members 24/7. Imagine you do a call that is upsetting. A cop or a correctional officer could notify their supervisor that they are stressed and request that they can return to the station to decompress. Or paramedics, they could use Sky in the safety of their ambulance. If one member was activated, a supervisor or a coworker could spell the other off. They can do the practice alone, or while one of the other attendants is doing notes or waiting an ambulance hold. The fire department could do the practice as a group or individually when back at the station before or after a call. By normalizing that occupational stress occurs and impacts us, we learn to mutually support each other in difficult times versus repressing it and potentially turning an occupational stress into an occupational stress injury. The days of going to the club or at home and drinking our problems away have passed. So, expected outcomes if you implement Sky in a first responder organization. Well, we'd have less sick time, we'd have less complaints, less use of force, more productivity, increased morale, and increase of support and awareness, and naturally reducing stigma. Next slide's going to be about the voluntary or mandated training. First responders operate within a paramilitary structure. We are instructed on how we're going to respond. We know that we receive training on the skills needed to do our job. If we are not trained in any area, we do not hold any value to it. They tell us the impact of stress on the job and the importance of healthy habits, but only a small percentage practice them. So let's imagine having CPR as a voluntary, non-reporting certification. I wonder what percentage of members would actually do it. Now imagine that same member is responding to a medical call needing CPR. I can guarantee you that that member is damn grateful they have been getting recertified, because at the critical time, it's too late to practice. This skill is not any different. Next, you're going to see a graphic on WSIB PTSD claims. Many claims occur in the last 1/3 of someone's career. Well, why is that? I think it's because our brain and our bodies change to adapt to the lifestyle we are living until it can't cope anymore. Back in 2017, I did an interview with a reporter talking about the impact PTSD is having on its members and society, with so many public safety personnel being off work. The London Free Press reported that the average citizen has 1 to 2 traumatic events in their lifetime that could cause PTSD. The average first responder has 500 in the first 10 years of the career. First responders are 3 to 4 times more likely to get divorced, have poor health, get cancer, or coronary issues in their lifetime. So finally, I was recruited to join a WSIB working group 3 years ago. There was a 1,765% increase in first responder occupational stress injury claims since 2016, when the presumptive legislation was enacted. WSIB has a 6% success rate in getting somebody back to pre-injury duties. That is not success. That is not good for the organization, and clearly not good for the members and those members who are shouldering the extra work when somebody goes off. WSIB is also expecting a dramatic increase in claims over the next year due to burnout, because everyone is doing more with less coming off the back of COVID. Last slide is about my oldest son. He just joined the OPP. He's just finishing with his coach officer. My wife and I just debated on what graduation gift we can give him. I was thinking about buying him a pocket knife with a glass break device on it, something handy in a pinch. Then we thought maybe we'll buy him a watch. But finally, we decided to enroll him in the Sky Resilience program. Since then, my wife and my daughter-in-law have taken Sky as well to help them support themselves through our careers. Sky has assisted me in living with the effects of operational stress. I'm a much better person, a father, and a husband when my stress is mitigated. Now let's work on having a long and healthy career as well. Thank you.
That's amazing, Steve. Thank you so much for really that informative and heartfelt sharing about your experience and what you've seen on an individual as well as a family and institutional perspective. So, getting to the crux of things, I think we all know that chronic stress really does affect our brain and our nervous system, and has very impactful, as Steve was sharing, effects on our mood and cognitive functions. But the good news is that, many of these things are reversible, if we're able to reduce and be able to see how we can manage stress. Now, there are many different coping mechanisms that we can use, including, being able to reappraise, have some reappraisal strategies, be able to, instead of bottling things up, being able to share and disclose our feelings, and also being able to tap into those traditional reward, systems of having more optimism, improving our sleep hygiene, exercising, making sure we have good social connections, and improving our physical and mental health can all help with that. There is actually a very impactful way to directly influence our mind and emotions, and have actually a direct influence on our brain and nervous system, and that is through the breath. And through the breath, neither at home nor at school have we really learned how to manage our mind and emotions and be able to bounce back after challenging experiences. And really using the breath and this secret of the breath, body, mind connection, we can start to become and train our mind to be more resilient and really tap into that cerebral neuroplasticity that is a foundational quality of the brain. So that cue in our Sky Resilience program. We strengthen those who serve and protect. We are customized, science-backed training for optimum performance and enhanced well-being. We have an online virtual format, which Dr. Sud will talk about his research around that a little bit later. We also have an in-person format, and these programs come in essentially two ways you can take it. You can take it in a two-part format. You have 2 days on 1 week and 2 days on a week, a couple weeks later. Or you can do it in a 4-day multidisciplinary, program consecutively in 1 week. Just to give you an idea of the content, we employ breath work, yoga, guided meditation, journaling, and one of the things that's really unique is these small group processes that really do build connection. And we know healing really moves at the speed of trust. So looking into how do we build that trust, what is the mechanism of trust? And we also have a very robust peer support community that lasts far beyond the workshop, that is provincial, national, and international as well. And our core technique is the Sky Breath meditation technique. You may be asking yourself, what is Sky Breath meditation? Well, it's a set of specific rhythmic breathing patterns that actually aid to de-link strong emotions and triggers from they're associated with the traumatic events from the mind and body. So you still have the memory, but that triggering, connection that you have with the memory is no longer there. You're able to remember the event, you're able to learn from it, and then move on and live in the present moment rather than being chained to the past. So it really does give you first responders that freedom that really everyone desires. So the first format of the program is 4 consecutive days. We start the interaction with the first responder in our pre-workshop orientation calls, where we assess any special needs, and we go over the program to make sure that the first responder doesn't have any surprises and they really know exactly what's going to be covered. Then we move into the first 2 days of the workshop that is really going into some mindful movement. We teach some grounding techniques so that if at any point in the program the participant gets triggered or even they feel kind of they're off their center, they can use these grounding techniques to calm down and come back to their center once again. We do some guided relaxation and meditation as well. So at this point, the participant can decide whether they want to go and finish off the last 2 days of the course, or they're also welcome to kind of take a pause if it's enough for them, practice the techniques on their own, and then when they feel like they're ready, they can move on to the second half of the program. And this is the part of the program where we dive deeper into some interactive processes. We review what's been done in the first part of the program, and then we actually teach the Sky Breath meditation program. We do a group practice, and then on the last day, we actually teach a home practice that you can use as a daily practice, or even in acute situations, as Steve was mentioning. We also have an optional 5th day, which is our follow-up, and we actually provide follow-ups with the Sky Breath meditation in a group, in a community every week. So this is not a one and done kind of a program. This is really a community that is going to walk that journey of healing with the first responder after the course. We also have the 2-and-2 format, which is often very useful, particularly with first responders that are working shift work and may not be able to get 4 days consecutive together. The 2-and-2 format starts off in the same way with the pre-workshop orientation call. Then we have day 1 and 2 on the first week. Then you can take a pause and wait 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, what have you, until you have availability for the last 2 days of the workshop, and then the optional follow-up session. So what are some of the benefits of the Sky Resilience program? Well, really what we've seen is we've been transforming first responders' lives through our science-backed breath-based tools. Some of these benefits are reduced suicidal ideation and moral injury. This is, of course, anecdotal from the veterans that have taken the program. Decreased stress, anxiety, and depression in a number of studies. Improve sleep quality, which is often, as Steve was mentioning, really something that first responders rather are really looking to improve. Restored sense of well-being and mental focus, renewed sense of connection and purpose, improved mental health, enhanced resilience, and the program really equips participants with prevention strategies for occupational stress. So they really have the tools that not only they can use in an acute situation, but also as a daily practice to reduce that baseline level of stress so that they're more resilient for anything that may come their way on the job or even at home. Our support starts even before the program with our pre-program intake calls to assess really any special needs and to really explain step by step what the participants may be experiencing during the program. Our instructors are available for Q&A and support during the course and then outside of class hours as well. And we provide materials and recordings to participants to really support them in their healing journey and, of course, in doing the daily Sky Home practice. As we said, we also have our weekly live 1-hour Sky Breath meditation follow-ups with a trained instructor for all our program graduates. If we take a little bit more of a global perspective, you may have seen the World Health Organization's pyramid of care starts off with the more highly costly therapies with the long stay facilities and the psychiatric and psychological services, which are indeed necessary for some and an important part of their care. But really, what has been recommended is this idea of building up the foundation of self-care, which are those therapies which are low cost and are really kind of at the fingertips of first responders when they need the most. And although much of the research and some of the research that Dr. Sid will be presenting is based on the Sky Resilience results after a traumatic incident, our approach is very much a preventative approach. We have a low-cost approach, so for $375, which is pretty much the cost of going to see a psychiatrist or a therapist for a few sessions, you can really have this tool with you for the rest of your life, kind of whenever you need it. We have a wide range, so a wide reach rather. So our programs can be taught to up to 50 participants. So rather than just a one-on-one therapy, it gives you the ability to scale the program over the entire department and even organization, and then a high frequency. So really participants can use this as a daily practice, as we were mentioning, for sustainable well-being, or as a practice that they can use in acute situation. So just to give some perspective, Marcel, I don't think is going to be able to join us, but his results are really based out of Bahia, Brazil, which Brazil, you may know, is one of the more violent places in the world. For instance, they have about 5.5 times our population, but they have about 5 times our rate of violent homicides. So it's a very difficult place for police to practice and work. And just to give you an idea of and a reference for the data we're about to show. So Marcel has been doing research with the Bahia, Brazil police, and he's been extracting actually hair cortisol to measure the stress hormone cortisol in the system, and thought we'd start off with some of the individual benefits that some of these police officers have experienced. As you can see here, over 80% increase in mental clarity, over 70% improvement in decision making, 80% improvement in sleep quality, over 80% improvement in the ability to manage emotions, which will play into the organizational benefits as well, dealing with the community and those very difficult acute calls, and also being able to, leave a previous call behind and come fresh with a calm, clear mind for the next call is also quite important. And they also saw a 75% improvement in the relationships, not only at work, but also at home as well. If we switch gears to the organizational perspective, the way Marcel and his team have done these programs is that as of yet, they've taught about 3,000 officers with the Bahia military police. They started off with the leaders, the top leaders in the organization. Then they started off what they called were these model units. So they would have the units practice the sky breath meditation before going out for their shift, and then they would measure these different endpoints, which I'm about to show in a moment. And then we've even trained some facilitator leaders that can lead the practice within the institution. And we have guided follow-up sessions for all those that would like to make this a weekly practice. So as you can see here, there were a number of organizational impacts. There was stronger community relations. They saw improvements in productivity. And some of the most stark improvements were a 60% reduction in the use of force. So this is actually a massive improvement that the Bahia police was very happy with. Them being in such a high stress, highly violent environment, being able to de-escalate and being in a position where you're able to, kind of turn down the heat, be more centered and calm going into a very difficult situation, especially being able to let go of what had happened before and be fresh and ready for the next call, was an improvement that actually encouraged them to now hire us to train the remaining 3,000 officers on their police force. So by the end, we will have 6,000 officers taught. They also saw a 70% decrease in community complaints as well. So with that in mind, I'd like to pass it on for another perspective, for the research perspective, to Dr. Abhimanyu Sood.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just gonna get my slides up and going. Can everyone see that? Pleasure to join you this afternoon. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Spencer. I've been invited to speak about some research which I'm leading out of Mount Sinai Hospital and the University of Toronto on the application of Sudarshan Kriya Yoga virtually delivered to help improve PTSD symptoms amongst Canadian veterans, both from the military and the RCMP. Some background, I'm sure we're familiar that PTSD remains a very significant treatment challenge amongst Canadian veterans. A cross-national analysis found that Canadians, in fact, had the highest lifetime prevalence of PTSD in the world at close to 10%. Our current therapies for post-traumatic stress disorder include primarily trauma-focused psychotherapy, such as cognitive processing therapy, as well as pharmacotherapies, both of which show effectiveness, but have limitations in terms of responsiveness, in terms of willingness of particularly military and public safety personnel ability to access and engage in these kinds of interventions. And so there's really a known need for us to expand treatment options. And I'll just build a little bit on what Spencer said, that we also need mechanisms for early intervention. Actually, what Steve identified using his example as well, of early intervention and even prevention of post-traumatic stress disorder and operational stress injuries.
Sorry, Abhimanyu, your slide is blank white, just so you know. There we go. Great, thanks.
Is that better? Okay, sorry about that. We also know that veterans, Canadian veterans, as well as active duty personnel, use about 50% of them use at least one complementary and integrative health therapy. That includes interventions like meditation and mindfulness treatments. So we know there's already very large uptake and use of interventions like Sudarshan Kriya yoga in the population of interest. I don't need to review Sky in detail. Thank you, Spencer, for having reviewed the program in great detail. Some of the research, I'm going to start with some general research, particularly on mental health impacts of Sky, and then focus on what we know about Sky for PTSD amongst veterans. So, you know, we see wide-ranging mental health impacts from Sky on clinical outcomes such as depressive symptomatology, comparable to other interventions such as antidepressant therapy, and even actually for more severe cases of depression, electric shock therapy. We also see improvements in physiological parameters. Spencer had mentioned cortisol hair samples being used as part of the research in Brazil. Other studies have demonstrated decreases in cortisol, which is a marker of physiological stress, and significant decreases in depression, and improvements in the kinds of things that we want to see improvements in, particularly things like overall well-being, quality of life, and deep sleep, which is really important for healing and resilience around mental health conditions. One recent study actually looked at a large population of both healthy as well as individuals who were living with mental illness, and compared outcomes of Sudarshan Kriya to a multitude of other mind-body interventions, including mindfulness-based stress reduction, another program called emotional intelligence. And along multiple parameters, stress, depression, mental health, connectedness, positive emotions, mindfulness, Sky Breath meditation actually outperformed the other interventions. This was a study at Yale. Likewise, published in the same year in 2020, a study out of Harvard compared an intervention called Wisdom on Wellness, which was developed as a resiliency and wellness intervention using mind-body interventions, and compared it to Sudarshan Kriya Yoga. And again, we found, this was done by some colleagues at Harvard, found that Sky outperformed a comparable mind-body intervention along multiple parameters: depression, anxious arousal, mood disturbance, and also improvements in things like life satisfaction and self-esteem. There's been a variety of research looking at Sudarshan Kriya Yoga's application for PTSD amongst veterans. This is one study here which looked at, this was an RCT done amongst military veterans, and found again improvements, significant improvements, actually improving at 1 year. So this is very rare for behavioral interventions. Typically, we see the biggest responsiveness immediately post-intervention. But in this study, a year later are when we saw the biggest improvements compared to people who received a standard of care as a control. Likewise, there's been a study, this is a waitlist control study, which is actually appropriate for mind-body interventions, looking at improvements in PTSD amongst Vietnam veterans. And again, found significant improvements from SKY, from what we expect in a comparative waitlist control trial. Most recently, a non-inferiority trial was run out of the Palo Alto Veterans Affairs Hospital in the US. This compared Sudarshan Kriya Yoga, SKY, to cognitive processing therapy, which is considered first-line or gold standard therapy for PTSD amongst veterans. And this was specifically designed as a non-inferiority trial, which is meant to look at not whether one intervention is better than the other, but does a new intervention, how does it compare to the standard of care? And the finding from the study was that we have non-inferiority of SKY as compared to cognitive processing therapy. And so as you can imagine, this opens up new kinds of treatment pathways, particularly when you think about how Sudarshan Kriya Yoga can be delivered. Steve mentioned particularly delivering the intervention in groups, and that being an important part of the effectiveness of the intervention. And so what we've done here in Canada in a first of its kind study is to think about how do we start addressing some of the population health needs of Canadian veterans. We know there's a very high prevalence of PTSD. We know there are major challenges in access to care, to effective therapies such as trauma-focused psychotherapies, such as pharmacotherapies. We know that veterans are turning to other kinds of interventions, such as cannabis, which may be helpful for symptomatology, but also has some risks and doesn't have a lot of demonstrated efficacy for PTSD. And we have major issues around access, particularly with the geographic distribution of veterans across the country. How do we make effective interventions available to them? And so that's the primary conceit of this randomized controlled trial that we're running. It's a waitlist control trial, recruiting Canadian veterans from across the country, where they will engage with SKY delivered virtually. And this was really pioneered, obviously, during the pandemic, when there was a need to be able to continue to offer the intervention, but be able to work within pandemic restrictions. And some of the anecdotal feedback that was received, particularly this was done in the United States in partnership with a number of the VA hospitals, was that different kinds of participants were actually able to access the intervention that weren't able to or had difficulty accessing the intervention when it was delivered in person, particularly because of geographic dispersion. But then also people who are sort of higher on the social anxiety scales, who are reluctant to engage in in-person group-based programs, were able to more comfortably engage in the program because they're doing it from the comfort of their home. Now, of course, this virtual delivery imposes some limitations. Not everybody has access to video and computer technology to be able to engage, but this kind of intervention offers a new kind of new vehicle for access. So we're enrolling currently. We're aiming to recruit about 200 participants, and we're well on our way. We're recruiting from multiple avenues, including a number of operational stress injury clinics from across the country. Working with a variety of community groups. There are a lot of Facebook groups. You know, veterans gather together quite avidly on Facebook and have been engaging in the study that way. The program is funded through the Atlas Institute for Veterans and Families, based out of the Royal Ottawa Hospital. And really, our key questions, and you know, maybe you can invite me back in a couple of years when we've completed the study and analyzed the data. But our key questions are really around these issues of, yes, does the program work as well when it's delivered virtually? We have anecdotal data that suggests it does, but we need to test that in a trial. And is this kind of delivery able to address these issues of reach, access, and scale? with a scale, with a very high prevalence of PTSD amongst veterans, amongst frontline safety officers, like Stephen mentioned, we need interventions that can be delivered relatively rapidly and potentially in large groups. One-to-one treatment is probably not going to be sufficient. I'm a practicing physician. I'm very well aware of the constraints that we have in our system around access and availability, also of medical and other professionals who have the knowledge and capacity to be able to treat and support people living with PTSD. We do need to find alternative ways to be able to address what Steve rightly identified as really a tsunami of mental illness amongst veterans and public safety personnel. Okay, I think I'll finish there and pass it back to Spencer.
Thanks, Abhimanyu. So, still waiting for the presenter. Here we go. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, super. So thank you, Dr. Sud, for that really great overview of some of the past research that's been done in your current research. And for a different perspective now, we'd like to invite Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Marcus Besseman from the Canadian Armed Forces. He's actually the Chief of Rehabilitation with the Canadian Armed Forces Health Service. And he's also with the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Medicine. And in addition to that, he's the team doctor for True Patriot Love Foundation. So he wears a number of hats and has a number of skills, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your experiences of Sky Resilience. Dr. Besseman?
Thank you, Spencer. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Perfect. And sorry for my voice. I'm just recovering from COVID. So my first positive test throughout this pandemic, but it came up over the Easter weekend. So thanks, Steve and Spencer and Abby. It's good to see good friends, and everything you said completely resonated with me. So I've got about 4 minutes to cover 4 points, and I'll try to keep it overarching. But the first one is, when I presented on mindfulness about a decade ago in the military, the first comment I got from some high-ranking officials was, Marcus, that's a nice idea, but there's no evidence. And I thought, you have to be kidding me. We mentioned John Kabat-Zinn bringing mindfulness meditation to North America in pain patients, and how effective that was in his book, Full Catastrophe Living. So I think there's no doubt anymore, all the neuroscience, all the ancestral science, which I consider as much science as the neuroscience, is clear and abundant and overwhelmingly in favor that these practices are effective. So that's the number one point. These are effective practices. The science is just as always catching up with what our ancestors and I think our traditional healers have known forever, is that there are many ways other than medications and surgery and psychotherapy to heal people. The number two, though, is that it's hard to meditate. Any patient that I've ever talked to about meditation, particularly military and first responders, and I think, Steve, you alluded to that really well, it's hard. And the last thing you want to do as a first responder who's used to reacting and responding to difficult situations is sit quietly with your thoughts, feelings, and emotions and just let them percolate like a stream, and how we say so nicely. And so I think that's the biggest point of resistance, is we all know it's helpful, but it's hard. And much like the CPT that Abby was mentioning, the cognitive processing therapy and prolonged exposure therapy, people give up. These might be effective therapies, but people give up, and the dropout rate in military personnel is very, very high because it's painful. It's literally painful to do these things, and people don't want to subject themselves to more pain, even though we know that the healing is in the feeling. So you have to go deep into the feeling to heal it. So I think of all the meditation forms I've come across, Sky Resilience is probably the fastest way to get into these states. And because it combines the various elements of breathing, I think it's applicable to many people. You know, I used to think meditation was applicable to all, but we know from Stephen Porges' work now and the polyvagal theory that if you're stuck in freeze mode versus fight flight, you may be actually stuck in a shutdown state where meditation might not actually help in its traditional form. It might make things worse. And I've seen that because you've suddenly disempowered your ego, which is your only defense mechanism. So that's one thing. I think the fact that it goes through very slow breathing to very fast breathing takes into account that variability in terms of our nervous system and the polyvagal theory. So the science, again, is all dovetailing. The point number 3 is there's so much evidence now on the importance of breath. I mean, it's been said many times, there's only 2 important breaths in your life, your first and your last. And we don't pay heed to all the ones in between, which are the most important ones as well. James Nestor's book, Breath, is a must read for anybody who's doubting whether breath is important. Dr. Stanislav Grof, who is kind of the father of psychedelic medicine, developed a technique called holotropic breath work in the 70s when LSD was banned. And it got people into these altered states of consciousness, often more effectively than even LSD and other substances. So I'm not saying this is a substitute for psychedelics, but before we get into the psychedelic realm or offer that to our members, I think this would be, as you mentioned with the pyramid, an amazing place to start. And there's also Wim Hof, and I know many people don't necessarily agree with Wim's approach, but the Dutch Iceman, they call him, who basically has broken all physiological records for cold water immersion, again, based on his breathing meditation technique, which involves some hyperventilation as well. And not to belabor that point, but he's an icon for many of our special forces people. So you have someone like this who stands on the top of mountains wearing shorts and has gone to Everest Camp 2. And that's somebody people can relate to and look up to from a military first responder perspective, who's embodying this so-called soft medicine, because it's anything but soft. In my book, this is hardcore medicine. And the last, I'll leave you with a very brief anecdote. One of the toughest cases, I think you may have come across this gentleman as well, Steve, that I've seen is a young combat engineer. And I'm going to get emotional because I've seen him on many occasions, including the call. He called me one Sunday morning saying he was done and he'd taken pills and he was basically bailing, and I was going to be the last person he was going to talk to. So we had him in various forms of therapy, and the traditional approaches just were not working. And at one point on one of the expeditions, after he threw over a bookcase in a fit of rage, I said, why not try Sky? I'd taken the course, I didn't take the teaching course. And he resoundingly responded to this in a way that I couldn't believe, you know, so much so he did the Invictus Games afterwards as a cyclist. And he had literally had made a bunch of decals on his bike for the crossbar with the mantra that he was taught in Sky breathing meditation. And that was his constant go-to, the focus, right? As we know, mantra brings you right back, like the breath does, to the moment. He would look down to his crossbar and he would get refocused. And this gentleman's now alive. He's with his 2 beautiful daughters and his wife, not just because of Sky breathing meditation, but clearly that was an important piece. And I'd say in the program that Steve and I volunteer at, the few times I pulled that out of the hat, I've always had people come up to me after and say, my God, like I've tried all kinds of forms of meditation. This short session was the most powerful thing I've ever experienced. You know, can you tell me more? And so I would leave it at that, but those are kind of the 4 points I would leave you with in about 4 minutes. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marcus, for sharing those insights. And I think what we'll do now is we'll open it up to some Q&A. We'll just flash up here our contact information. If anyone would like to get in contact with us personally, you can take a screenshot, and also this will be available on the recording. And I'd also like to share our peer support leader, Steve, and his contacts, as well as our program coordinator. If organizationally and institutionally you'd like to have a program at your institution, you can contact our program coordinator, Belen Montefalcone, and her details and our websites are there. So we'll open it up to Q&A now. I'll just stop sharing the screen. I know we had a few questions there. Let me take a look. And maybe just before diving into the question, just wanted to share as well that we have a few members of our teaching team some of our veteran teachers, Dr. Hitu Jagesar, Seema Sharma, and Manjeet Johal, who is our West Coast team, that are going to be teaching some programs with the Vancouver Police Department. So really happy they could join us here today as well. So we take a look at the questions. I can see that there was a question from Tracy that says, can you learn the sky breathing technique without attending the 4-day or 2-and-2 program? So that's not possible. Yeah, really, in order to learn the technique, you want to do it in a controlled environment with trained teachers, because often the technique is very powerful. And, just like you shake, a dirty rug, what's the first thing that comes out? All the dust and the dirt. And in the same way, we can have a big release on the program. And it's always just much safer to do so in a really safe environment with people that have been trained to kind of handle any eventuality. And of course, if you have any other questions, feel free to connect and we can go more into the details of the program.
I got a question. I'm going to direct it towards Marcus if I can. Marcus, imagine if the Canadian Armed Forces selected this intervention or this skill base. What do you think would be happening, A, for your occupational stress rates? In Canada, we have 5,500 first responders off in Ontario. We have 11,000 in Canada. We have the 3rd highest PTSD rate in the world. What do you think the benefits could be if a large organization like the CAF decided to implement a SKY program?
So that's a big question, and I guess we have 2 minutes left to answer, but I'll be very succinct if I can. I finally got an appointment to speak with the Surgeon General just before I release in 2 months' time, and I'd love to get all this data that was beautifully presented today because I think this is powerful evidence. And maybe I'll defer to Daniel Siegel's interpersonal neurobiology, and a lot of that was mentioned in terms of our own autoregulation of nervous system and the sympathetic parasympathetic you alluded to, Steve. There's no doubt that we have a lot of trauma, but there's a lot of moral injury and sanctuary trauma that we've talked about, leadership failings or perceived leadership failings, right? Much of that I think has to do with people that are shut down, hurt people, healed people, heal people. The fact that this was described as being more effective in a group, I think isn't surprising because I do think that those nervous systems co-regulate and interregulate. And not to get too ahead of myself, but I think even things like op honor, which is our biggest dilemma right now from a cultural perspective, I think it could change. We keep saying changing the culture, as if you could change the doctrine of an organization just by telling people what's right or wrong. People have to feel what's right or wrong. And I think this is one technique that can allow them to feel that, if that makes sense. So I do think it could have a huge impact on the moral injury, the sanctuary trauma, and the rates of PTSD.
I agree. I feel that if my police service, a lot of people want to help, and whether it's real or perceived issues, a lot of times we have our own issues with stigma, and I stigmatize myself, and then we have perceived stigma that's occurring in the workplace. If everybody was working together to mutually support each other, I don't think that would exist. I think it doesn't actually exist, and all other perceptions that we have are doing this, and this is how it helps us get through this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Great question.
Thank you, Steve. I don't see any other questions coming up in the chat there, and I think we're at time here, 2 p.m. ET. So thank you to all our presenters, and thank you to CIPSR. Thank you, Cara and Kyle and the whole team for welcoming us. It was a real great pleasure, and appreciate all your hard work behind the scenes in putting this together.
Thank you. And I just want to say a quick thanks to all of our wonderful presenters today, Dr. Everman Yusud, Spencer DeLille, Dr. Marcus Besseman, and Steve Stokin. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for joining us.